I used to work as an overnight physician covering the isolation wing of a regional hospital during the first year of the pandemic, back when a whole section of the building had been converted almost overnight into a unit specifically for the sickest patients we had. I'd just come back from a short leave, and this was my first full week back on the overnight rotation. I want to walk through exactly what happened that week, in order, because looking back, I don't think I fully understood how strange it all was until I laid it out afterward, start to finish. My shift ran from 8 at night to 8 in the morning, and for most of that first week back, I was essentially the only physician covering the unit overnight, with 2 nurses, an orderly, and 1 member of the overnight custodial staff rounding out the team. At that point, the isolation wing only had 1 patient left, a woman in her early 30s who'd been admitted a couple weeks earlier and was pregnant at the time. Stable, but not improving. Not getting worse either. Just holding steady in that in-between place we saw a lot of during that stretch of the pandemic. The first thing that struck me as odd happened on my second night back, when the custodian pulled me aside near the nurses' station and told me something the previous shift apparently hadn't passed along. He said a family member of our patient had shown up a few days earlier, before I'd returned, and had insisted, repeatedly, that he bring a small item into her room, something they wanted physically placed near her or touched to her, for what they described as good luck and protection. He said he'd resisted at first. It wasn't standard protocol to bring outside objects into an isolation room, but the family had been persistent enough that he'd eventually given in, just to end the conversation, and had quietly done what they asked before returning the item to them afterward. I remember not thinking much of it at the time. Families get anxious. They want to feel like they're doing something, and a small, harmless object brought in and out under supervision wasn't exactly a serious breach. I told him it was fine, thanked him for mentioning it, and went back to my rounds. The patient delivered a few days later, an emergency C-section given her condition, and the baby was immediately moved into our unit's small neonatal isolation section because he was struggling too. That night, it was just me, 2 nurses, the orderly, and the custodian again, the rest of the day team having already gone home. One of my nurses went in fully suited to check on the baby, and about half an hour later, she called me in, and by the time I got there, the baby's vitals were crashing. We worked on that infant for hours, from around 9 that night until almost 3 in the morning, and he didn't make it. I won't pretend that wasn't its own kind of terrible night on its own, the kind every person in that field carries with them. What I want to focus on is what happened after, because that's the part I still can't fully explain. The mother's family came the next morning to collect her and the baby's remains, and by the time I came back for my next overnight shift, the unit was completely empty. No patients at all. My whole team was relieved, genuinely looking forward to an easy night after how brutal the last one had been. Around 9:30, I was sitting down, finally eating dinner I'd brought from home, when I heard one of the nurses scream from somewhere near the ward entrance. I ran out and found 2 dogs lying dead just outside the isolation wing's main doors, blood around their mouths, both of them local strays the staff recognized from around the building for months. There was a 3rd dog there too, one none of us had ever seen before, twisting and thrashing in a way that looked genuinely wrong, not like normal animal panic, before the orderly and custodian finally managed to chase it off the property. We cleaned up, called it in, and went back inside. The backup generator in that unit only powered the areas where patients would normally be to protect the equipment, since the rest of the ward didn't need it with no one admitted. As soon as we finished cleaning, the main lights in the ward went out entirely, leaving just the dim emergency lighting over what used to be the patient's room. We ended up sitting together near that empty room, the 4 of us, because none of us wanted to be alone in that building that night. Through the glass separating the hallway from what had been her room, we watched the lights inside flicker on their own. We heard a bathroom tap running from inside, and then shutting off and running again, several times in a row, in a room that had been empty and unused for over 12 hours. Something moved across the ceiling tiles above the hallway, fast, like someone running along the space above the drop ceiling. The medical equipment still plugged in inside that empty room started switching on and off by itself. I made everyone stay together in sight of each other for the rest of that shift. Nobody slept. When the morning team arrived, we all just quietly went home. That same morning, on my way back, I stopped to grab a few things at a store near my apartment. Walking from where I'd parked to the entrance, I lost my footing on completely flat, dry pavement and went down hard, and a delivery truck passed close enough behind me seconds later, that I genuinely believe if I'd fallen, even slightly differently, I wouldn't be telling you this. I checked the ground afterward. No crack, no debris, nothing that explained the fall. I finished my errand, shaken but functional, and on the drive home, a car ran a stop sign and clipped my back bumper at low speed. Not enough to hurt me, but enough to leave me sitting in my car afterward, trying to process that this was now the second unexplainable near miss of the morning. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, a neighbor's dog, one that had never once acted aggressively toward me in the 2 years I'd lived there, came off its property at a dead sprint straight at me, and I ended up half falling into the flower bed at the edge of my own yard, trying to get away from it before its owner got it back under control. 3 incidents, one morning, and by the time I got inside my apartment, I remember standing in my kitchen thinking, with complete clarity, that something was actively trying to hurt me, and I had no framework at all for what that meant or why. I went to bed exhausted, and had a dream that afternoon I still remember in total detail. In it, a friend of mine had come over to visit, sleeping in my living room while I slept in my bedroom. In the dream, she got up at some point and walked into my room and found a woman standing beside my bed in a pale hospital gown, hair loose and disheveled, staring down at me with an expression of pure fury. The moment my friend and the woman made eye contact, my friend turned and ran, and the woman followed her out of the room. I woke up covered in sweat, genuinely struggling to catch my breath, and within a minute, my phone rang. It was that exact friend, telling me she wanted to come stay at my place for a few days. I told her, without really explaining why, that it wasn't a good time, and got off the phone as quickly as I could, unable to shake the feeling that I'd just watched something that hadn't happened yet. For the following several nights, I couldn't shake the sense that someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. I heard what sounded like knocking, faint, unhurried, at odd hours. Once, I was certain something was watching me through the gap in my bedroom curtains from the small balcony outside, though there was nothing there when I checked. Every plant I owned, healthy up to that point, died within days, all at once, for no reason I could identify. I started noticing a faint, sour smell every time I walked into my apartment that wasn't there before, and that I couldn't trace to any source. I never brought in anyone official to deal with any of it. I didn't know who you were even supposed to call for something like that, and some part of me didn't want to make it more real by treating it as something that needed a formal solution. What I did instead, for whatever it's worth, was simple. I stopped working nights on that unit. I requested a transfer to a different department, which was granted without much question given everything going on in the hospital at that time. And within about 2 weeks of making that change, the feeling in my apartment, the knocking, the smell, all of it, tapered off on its own until it stopped completely. I never found out who that family member was, or what exactly they'd wanted touched to her before she was admitted. I never found out whether any of it was actually connected, the object, the animals, the accidents, the dream, or whether I've simply strung together a series of unrelated bad weeks into a story that feels connected because I needed it to mean something. I only know that I haven't taken another overnight isolation shift since, and that to this day, if a dog runs at me unprovoked, or I hear a tap running in an empty room, some small, stubborn part of my brain still goes back to that week, and I still don't have an answer for any of it. I want to start by saying I've worked ICU step-down for almost 6 years now, long enough that very little rattles me anymore. What happened during one specific stretch of night shifts is the only thing in my entire career I still can't file away as just another hard week. I've told this story exactly twice before tonight, and both times I stopped partway through because I couldn't make myself finish it. I'm going to try to get through the whole thing this time. Our unit takes patients stepping down from full ICU care, still critical, still monitored constantly, but one level removed from the worst of it. I work nights, 3 shifts a week, 12 hours each, usually with one other nurse and a rotating tech covering our hallway of 8 rooms. This particular stretch started with a new admission in room 6, an older man, mostly unresponsive, family visiting in shifts throughout the day, and gone by the time my shift started at 7. The thing I want to describe first isn't paranormal at all, at least not obviously. It's a small detail that only became strange in hindsight. The patient's daughter asked, on her first visit after he was moved to our unit, whether we could leave a specific chair in his room, an old wooden one she'd brought from home. positioned facing his bed at a very particular angle. She was oddly precise about it, actually got up and adjusted it herself after housekeeping had cleaned the room, insisting it needed to face exactly that way. I remember thinking it was a strange thing to be particular about, but families get attached to small rituals when someone's dying, and it wasn't hurting anything, so I let it go. For the first several nights, nothing about room 6 stood out beyond the normal rhythm of a critical patient. He held steady, not improving, not declining sharply, the kind of stability that can go on for a while in that unit. It was on my 4th night with him that things started to shift. Around 2 in the morning, doing rounds, I walked past room 6 and the chair had moved. Not dramatically, just turned maybe 20 degrees from where the daughter had so carefully positioned it, now angled slightly toward the door instead of the bed. I assumed housekeeping or the overnight tech had bumped it and straightened it back myself without thinking much of it. It happened again 2 nights later. Same chair, same subtle rotation, always toward the door, never anywhere else. I started actually paying attention after that, and on my next shift, I made a point of checking the chair every single time I passed that room, logging it mentally against how much time had passed. It moved gradually, a little more each time I checked, like something was slowly turning it, degree by degree, over the course of a night, always ending up facing the door by early morning no matter how many times I reset it. I mentioned it to the overnight tech, half joking, expecting her to tell me I was imagining the increments. She didn't laugh. She told me she'd noticed the same thing on her own rounds and had assumed I was the one moving it for some reason, since she hadn't wanted to bring it up herself in case it sounded ridiculous. The patient's condition started declining around my 6th night with him. Nothing sudden, just a slow, steady downward trend that told us both, without needing to say it out loud, where this was heading. That same night, doing a routine check around 3 a.m., I walked in and the chair was facing the bed again, perfectly, exactly the angle his daughter had originally set it to, for the first time since it had started drifting toward the door. I remember standing in that doorway for a long moment, unable to explain why that felt so much worse than the gradual drifting had. He passed 2 nights later, in the early morning, quietly, with no family present, which happens more than people realize. We did the standard process afterward, and his room sat empty for the rest of that week, waiting to be reassigned to a new admission, standard turnover in a unit that never really stops needing beds. Here's the part I still haven't been able to explain to my own satisfaction, no matter how many times I've gone over it. The room's monitor, still connected to nothing, no patient hooked up to it at all, powered down as far as any of us understood, began intermittently displaying a heart rate reading. Not an error code, not a flat line, an actual number, fluctuating slightly the way a real reading does, appearing for a few seconds at a time before the screen went dark again, at completely random intervals over the following 4 nights, always caught by whichever of us happened to be walking past at the wrong moment. We called biomedical engineering in to check the equipment, fully expecting some kind of electrical fault, a capacitor holding a charge, something with an actual explanation. They tested it thoroughly, found the monitor completely inert with no power source active, no battery backup engaged, nothing that could explain a live-looking reading appearing on a dead screen, and ultimately just swapped the unit out entirely rather than offer us any real answer. The new monitor never did it. Room 6 got a new patient the following week, and everything about that room went back to being completely unremarkable for the rest of the time I worked there. No drifting chair, no phantom readings, nothing. I want to tell you the part that actually made me request a transfer off nights, because it isn't any of what I've already described. It happened almost a month later, well after room 6 had returned to normal, on a night I wasn't even thinking about any of this anymore. I was doing paperwork at the nurse's station around 4 a.m. when our unit's electronic system logged a new patient file being opened, the way it automatically does whenever someone's admission paperwork gets entered into the system, complete with a soft notification chime we all recognized instantly. I checked the admissions board. No new patient had arrived. No one on my team had entered anything. I pulled up the file that had just been logged, purely out of confusion about what could have triggered the notification, and it opened to a blank intake form, no patient name filled in anywhere, no data at all, except for one field, the assigned room number, room 6. I sat there staring at that screen for a long time before I finally closed it, deleted the blank entry through our system's standard correction process, and didn't mention it to anyone else on shift that night. I requested a transfer to day shift the following week, citing personal reasons, and it was approved without much discussion, given how common that kind of request is in our field. I've thought about that blank admission form more than almost anything else in my career. I keep landing on the same question, one I've never been able to answer and honestly don't want to. If that form had actually been filled out completely, if a name had populated in that empty field before I closed it, I don't know whose name I would have found there or what it would have meant if I had. I've decided, for my own peace of mind, that I'm genuinely grateful I closed it when I did, before I had the chance to find out.